Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, cutting a crossfade on analog tape with the same razor blade that you use to line up Bolivian marching powder, or else a scrappy upstart, clicking a digital crossfade with the same mouse that you use to order a healing crystal from Urban Outfitters, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the first Friday of August 2020, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you, as always, by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to hire somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Asa who drove a Subaru Forester with a Sublime with Rome bumper sticker on it, and who liked to cosplay specifically from the 1997 movie Judge Dredd. And old Asa would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in like 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. We don't have to deal with web developers anymore. We can have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. You get hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, social media integrations, mailing list tools. You can do commission-free fan subscriptions. It's really a great service. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Just use the promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live, here's where you can do it. Every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, my YouTube channel that is, I do Sunday songs. That basically means that I play songs, I check out what everyone is requesting in the comments, I answer comments from the chat. It's really fun. It's really interactive. We're starting to build a little community over there every Sunday night. So you should really stop on by. Sunday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Just head to YouTube, type in my name, and subscribe to the channel, and you'll be good to go. Last things last, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things you could do to help. You could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support a creative endeavor that you love. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as basically a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay, but that you choose to pay because you dig the show, and you won't miss a couple of bucks per month for it. So if just 1% of our listenership would kick in about the price of a cup of coffee every month, it'd make a huge difference. So thanks for everyone who's already done that. If you're not in a place where you can contribute financially, I get it. I've been there before. You could still help the show by doing two things that are free. One of those things is leaving us a review over at iTunes. I thank the 1,000 or so people that have already done that. Or you could just tell a friend about the show. Tell someone who you think might dig it. The simple math on those last two things is that they're free and that they will help me a lot more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there, and I hope you dig this week's show. Our guest this month is of Choctaw heritage and hails from Shawnee, Oklahoma. Samantha Crain got her start playing coffee shops on self-booked tours until one of her albums made it into the hands of Avett Brothers manager Dolph Ramsar, who signed her to his independent label. From there, Samantha took her music to a more national stage. She's toured with Brandi Carlile, The Mountain Goats, Neutral Milk Hotel, First Aid Kit, Tao and the Get Down Stay Down, Josh Ritter, and many others. Her songs have been featured in television shows on CBS and HBO. She's won 2 Native American Music Awards and 1 Indigenous Music Award. Rolling Stone has said that her lyrics are plain spoken, but the emotion in her tone is a dissertation. Spin Magazine has noted of her voice, her powerhouse wail cuts to the quick, an oddly fascinating combination of booming power and quavering vulnerability. And finally, The Guardian has declared that the striking imagery of her lyrics finds beauty and pathos in the details of downtrodden lives. Samantha and I have been friends for many years. We've toured the same circuit for about a decade now, and it was an absolute pleasure to jump on the phone with her last week and hear about her journey so far. Sam Crain, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. Talk to me a little bit about growing up. You grew up in Oklahoma. Talk to me about where you came from and the music and culture that you were first exposed to as a kid.
Well, I grew up in a town called Shawnee, Oklahoma, on the outskirts. So Shawnee itself is not too small of a town. I think when I was growing up, it was probably around 15,000 people, which, I mean, that might sound really small to people that grew up in actual cities. But I think if you are from the Midwest or something like that, that's like a pretty sizable town around here. But I grew up kind of on the outskirts of that. So I grew up going to like small country schools. Like I graduated with like 30 people in my class. But I grew up, like, as far as my introduction to music, it was mainly through church. My dad was did a bit of, like, traveling Southern Baptist, like, evangelism, like those, when you think of, like, tent revivals, kind of.
Yeah.
He did that, but like with strength demonstrations. Like there was this thing called the Power Team that was big in the 90s. That was like they would preach and then they would like break bricks and bend license plates and like lift a bunch of weight on stage. So it was very much like, through Christ, I can do all things sort of messaging, I guess.
Oh, wow. So it was kind of like a liturgy that brought in like different feats of physical prowess, basically?
Yes, basically. And he wasn't on the power team, but he was a professional power lifter when I was growing up. Like he was competitive and that's what he did for a living. And so I would I would travel with him sometimes when he would go do his like evangelical things where he would lift a bunch of weight or rip a giant phone book in half and then preach basically. And then he would sing because he was like kind of fancied himself a bit of a folk singer. Like he played guitar and like a giant 12-string Dreadnought Martin. That was like his guitar. And that was kind of my first introduction to music, was the music like through Southern Baptist Church, and then kind of all the stuff that was coming out of his like of Christian music, which was like Larry Norman and like the whole Jesus movement, like from California in the 70s or whatever.
Oh, I'm not too familiar with that. Like what did that stuff kind of sound like?
It was basically kind of like California folk that you would expect, like the whole Laurel Canyon thing, but it was artists that were singing Christian music, but it wasn't like hymns. It was like a bit more philosophical almost. Like there was this guy Larry Norman that was big. There was a guy named Randy Stonehill that people liked. There was, I'm trying to think some of the other, this band called DeGarmo and Key, a band called Second Chapter of Acts. yeah, I don't know. It's like it was a weird little like niche of like Christian folk music, like in the 70s. And so I heard all of that, but then he also listened to Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel and Joni Mitchell and Neil Young. So that was sort of my introduction to music. I would like sing with him sometimes, but I didn't really get into myself being interested in playing music until I was a teenager, like a super emo, depressed teenager, like in my bedroom.
Gotcha. Well, before we get to emo land, which I'm happy to get to very soon, talk to me a little bit. I mean, I can't help but push a little further and ask, just on the ground, what was it like at this kind of traveling tent revival that your dad was a part of? How many people were there? What sort of buildings or tents was it actually in? What was the food like? What was the vibe like? Can you kind of describe it for us?
Yeah, I mean, that was a part of my like very strange childhood because I also was a competitive powerlifter as a kid, which it sounds insane, but I traveled a lot for meets and competitions and stuff. And then we would also do the revivals. My dad would do those as well. And those were really bizarre looking back on it, but it's also pretty close to how I would describe like house shows currently for me. Basically like 40 people shoved in sort of these little halls, like in the back of, there's like the main sort of sanctuary area in a church, but then they have these sort of like community halls always in the back, which have hilarious linoleum tile and like walls painted yellow and like little kitchens attached to them, and bad Folgers coffee that's burnt. The smell of it is just like always present back there. Mm-hmm. And they would just set up like a PA with a single microphone usually, and he would just like on the floor in front of 40 people in their folding chairs under the very unflattering flashing those like long light bulbs that like are on the drop tile ceilings.
Right. Yeah.
He would preach and sing and lift some weights, and then usually there'd be like a potluck dinner afterwards, where people would bring any kind of casserole that you could imagine. And yeah, it would just be like, mainly like lower middle class white families, just because of like where he was traveling in Oklahoma. And then sometimes we would go to Native American Baptist churches as well. So yeah, it's kind of like a circuit. I don't know if it still is around, because I think like mega churches have sort of like taken over everywhere now. But then like in the 80s and 90s, it was really common for everyone to just have like a home church where there was just like 100 members, and they would have events like this. So
got it.
That was sort of what it was like.
So I can only guess then, if you're heading into your goth phase in your early teenage years, was that a reaction to that way growing up, or did that just kind of happen on its own because you fell in with a different group of kids, or you found a couple different albums? How did you head into that portion of your life? Well, I think it was just like a natural progression of realizing that I was like the weird kid. I think when you're like when you're like younger, that sort of thing doesn't register with you. Like you're not that self-aware of being, at least I wasn't, of being like made fun of or being perceived as like different. But the older I got, the more that stuff started sticking out to me, especially because it was such a small community. And I was definitely pegged as sort of the Allison Reynolds from The Breakfast Club sort of character, just like the loner, and like my mom made all my clothes, and like I was gone every weekend for
powerlifting competitions, which might have been cool when I was in like, you know, third grade, but then by the time you get into fourth and fifth grade, that's not like a cool thing for a girl to be doing. Like that's not, that doesn't make you like pretty or cool or anything like that. So I think it was just like a natural progression of being more aware that I was sticking out like a sore thumb, like in my hometown. And I just kind of got really introspective and started writing a lot of poetry because there wasn't really like a place for me to like fit in. I think there wasn't like an art, it wasn't like a theater group that I could join or like any sort of music scene there. You know, it was just like if you weren't in 4-H or FFA or you didn't play like basketball and softball, there was no way of like figuring out where you belong.
Well, yeah, and even at that time, there wasn't even really internet at that time to find a culture or a subculture that you might, you know, fit into. Like I have a feeling that growing up in Shawnee now, if you had a broadband connection, it might be a lot easier to find a niche that you fell into.
Completely, yeah. Yeah, it was just like right before internet was super accessible. So, I mean, I would say, I think we got internet for the first time at my house, like right before I graduated high school. So probably around like, when did I graduate? So probably around like 2002 or 3, I guess. That's
Sure.
Whenever we got internet. So I was like already well into my, you know, angsty teenage phase by then.
Sure. And so how did that manifest itself eventually into, you say you started with poems, how did that manifest itself into songwriting and your own voice as a songwriter? When did that begin?
Well, I got a guitar for my, I want to say like 14th birthday, I think. And my dad like wanted to try to teach me how to play, I think, but I'm just super stubborn and like I've always been a bit of an autodidact. Like I don't really like to be taught how to do things. I just like to learn myself whenever I'm ready and in the way that I would like to learn.
Sure.
And so it took me, I would say, another year and a half before I really was bored enough one summer to go to the music store in Shawnee, which was called Music Unlimited, which was like a guitar store, and they also had sheet music and things like that. And I went there and I bought like a guitar chord, an entry guitar chord book, and sat down, taught myself like probably 4 or 5 chords, probably G, C, E minor, D. That was probably the beginning. And I just practiced those over and over. And once I got those down, I was like, cool. And I just like put the book aside. I was like, okay, I can like start writing songs now, right? Like I already know 4 chords. So, and that's kind of what I started doing. I would just like sit in my room and, sometimes like the poems that I had written beforehand or just any sort of lyric idea, I would just kind of sing them over those chords. And that was sort of my introduction to songwriting, was just kind of out of my own head that way.
And so how did you start taking those from the page to other people hearing them? Was there a venue for you to play those in any way? I know obviously probably not like a rock club or something where you were from, but were you able to play them at like a talent show, or were you able to play them to friends, to family? How did you start bringing those songs into the world?
I did, there was a couple of things. So by the time I turned 16, I had quite a bit of freedom, I guess. Like I grew up in a pretty like with a laissez-faire parenting style, I guess. And so from the minute that I got my driver's license, I was driving as far as my car would let me go, pretty much. And, back when gasoline was 77 cents a gallon, so you could afford to just kind of drive. And there was a open mic in Oklahoma City at a place called Galileo's. It's called Picasso's now, but it was called Galileo's back then. And I would start signing up for that open mic. The way that they worked is like you would start out by signing up for one or two songs, and then if the guy that was hosting it liked you, like if he thought you were good enough, he would start giving you bigger chunks of time where you could play like 20 minutes. And I think I did that open mic for probably 2 years before I got to a point where he was giving me bigger chunks of time where I could play, 20 minutes or so. And then there was also a couple of coffee shops around Oklahoma City that also had open mics that I would just sort of frequent. There was a newspaper called the Oklahoma Gazette, which is still published currently, and they have like a classifieds in the back, which is just like all of the open mics or poetry nights or anything like that. And I would just kind of make the rounds and like go to all of those. And that was kind of how I started in terms of like playing in front of people.
Such an immense amount of power that those people running the open mics used to have, man. You know what I mean?
I know. Yeah, they definitely were like the gatekeepers for sure.
Oh man, it would be like that in every like when you finally did go from, Joe Schmo, hoping that they would call you to maybe getting like a featured spot. It really did feel like Lorne Michaels from Saturday Night Live had called you and booked you. You know what I mean?
For sure. Yes. Oh my gosh.
When did it get to a point where people started recognizing, wow, this, she's really got something going on, and then you're able to record and get your music out of Oklahoma? How did that happen, and who was involved in helping you make that happen?
Well, I actually started booking tours for myself like pretty quickly. Like right after I graduated high school, I did go to college at a local university for 2 semesters, and hardly ever went to class, and just like it was not fitting with me, and it was not what I thought. I thought that it was going to be this place where I found like my people or something. And I think what I realized is I just wanted to see more of what was out there. And so I just kind of not really knowing what I was doing, but just being somebody that I think has just one of those dispositions where I'm not like really afraid to try things, even if I'm not doing it right. So, there was a website called, I don't even remember, I think it was called like Midwest Touring or something like that, Midwest Bands. And basically it just had like an online directory of venues and coffee shops and like record stores, any place that live bands would play. And then there was also a website that still might be around called, I think it was called Indie on the Move, I think. And they had a similar sort of directory. And I just sort of made this, drafted this like email, like what I thought was like a booking email, and like got my MySpace page all looking good, or what I thought was looking good, with my 2 songs that I had recorded. And
your 5 top friends?
Yes, 5 top friends, and like my 2 songs that I had recorded just like at my uncle's house, like in his basement on whatever studio equipment that he had, which was not fancy by any means, and I'm sure that the recordings were not good, but that just happened to be kind of a golden age of all of these coffee shops and record stores and everything that would just they would give you a chance, they would just be like, sure, you can play a show. I think they all still had operational money at that time and didn't need to make like a ton of money every night. They could just give bands a chance to try things out. And that's what I did. I just sort of got a map and was like, where do I want to go? And just like drew a little line and just tried to book shows in those towns. And then if I couldn't find a show in that town, then I would just kind of stay there, or I would skip over it, or I don't know. I just kind of like toured around in this vaudeville. Around that time, I also picked up a friend, my friend Beth Bombara, who actually has a very good solo career of her own these days.
I know Beth. Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, and she was sort of my like side man. So she played like guitar with me, and we had sort of this ramshackle drum kit made out of buckets and pots and things. And she played that. It was very much a gimmicky, but we weren't very good back then, so we kind of had to have a gimmick, I think. But yeah, we just did that. We just like drove around and played at coffee shops and venues that were like way too big, and venues that were really small and smelly. And we played at record stores. We busked, we just, anywhere that would let us play, we would play.
Yeah, when I was getting started in Chicago, I found a similar website like that. It was called like Do DIY USA. And when I discovered it, when there was all these like phone numbers and email addresses for places where you could maybe get a gig, it was as if I discovered like El Dorado's gold. I was like, oh man, no problem. I can definitely just email. And I used to go, I was working at the time Monday through Friday, but I would book stuff on weekends. And I don't know exactly what I was looking for. I really did think that, driving out to like Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and playing first of 15 bands at 6:30 in the afternoon, like that some guy smoking a cigar would be like, young man, I work for Warner Brothers Records.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know what the fuck I was thinking. Like,
we had so many weird shows that I was just like, what? Maybe I need to take like a different approach here, because there was one time that I couldn't get a show in Salt Lake City, and we normally played at this place called Kilby Court, which was is still around. And unfortunately, I have not graduated to a bigger venue. I've been playing Kilby Court since I was 21 years old. But they were booked that night or something, and I had emailed so many different places, and this one venue was like, yeah, you can play a show here. And I didn't really look into it. I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't heard of it. We get there, and it's probably like 1,000 cap, like one of those big box venues that like DJs play at.
Okay, yeah.
And I was just like, this is a giant mistake. Like, I don't know why they've booked us, and it should be showing that I didn't know enough to ask what kind of venue this was, that you shouldn't have booked me. But yeah, we had 2 people show up, and it was it was like really amazing to think about at this point, just like in 1,000 cap venue on stage playing to 2 people. And I was just like, what's going on? But that was before I had a booking agent to make sure I wasn't making mistakes like that.
I can do you one worse. I'm not going to mention this person's name because this is an embarrassing story for them. But long story short, it was an artist that opened for a much bigger artist in Seattle at a theater. And that theater said, you should come back and, play another show after this so that you can, build your own following here. And they went back to play, and they literally sold 0 tickets.
Oh my gosh.
It got to showtime, and the promoter, the owner of the theater, came back and was just like, here's your money. You don't have to play the gig because there's literally nobody here.
Oh my God. I don't know if I've ever had 0 people, but 2 is like right there.
It sounds like where Samantha grew up, there wasn't much of an opportunity for her to find like-minded artistic peers. And it's funny, once you finally become an adult and have found your place in the world, it's actually very artistically useful to have come from a smaller town that didn't fit that cookie-cutter suburb mold. You have experiences that are more unique to draw on, you have a different perspective than most of your peers. But at the time, when you're a kid, it must be a lonely feeling because you're not sure that you ever will find your place. Straddling those two different worlds, the one she came from and the one she arrived in, reminded me of a beautiful poem by Elizabeth Bishop about having your heart in two places. It's entitled The Weed. I dreamed that dead and meditating, I lay upon a grave or bed, at least some cold and close-built bower. In the cold heart, its final thought stood frozen, drawn immense and clear, stiff and idle as I was there. And we remained unchanged together for a year, a minute, an hour. Suddenly there was a motion, as startling there to every sense as an explosion. Then it dropped to insistent, cautious creeping in the region of the heart, prodding me from desperate sleep. I raised my head. A slight young weed had pushed up through the heart, and its green head was nodding on the breast. All this was in the dark. It grew an inch like a blade of grass. Next, one leaf shot out its side, a twisting, waving flag, and then two leaves moved like a semaphore. The stem grew thick. The nervous roots reached to each side. The graceful head changed its position mysteriously, since there was neither sun nor moon to catch its young attention. The rooted heart began to change, not beat. And then it split apart, and from it broke a flood of water. Two rivers glanced off from the sides, one to the right, one to the left, two rushing, half-clear streams, the ribs made of them two cascades, which, assuredly smooth as glass, went off through the fine black grains of earth. The weed was almost swept away. It struggled with its leaves, lifting them fringed with heavy drops. A few drops fell upon my face and in my eyes so I could see, or in that black place I thought I saw, that each drop contained a light, a small illuminated scene. The weed-deflected stream was made itself of racing images, as if a river should carry all the scenes that it had once reflected shut in its waters and not floating on momentary surfaces. The weed stood in the severed heart. "What are you doing there?" I asked. It lifted its head all dripping wet with my own thoughts and answered then. "I grow," it said, "but to divide your heart again." So from there, from that kind of early DIY beginning, clearly you got some more things in place. You were able to release some records nationally. You ended up signing with Ramsar Records for a while. That is, of course, the same label as the Avett Brothers were on at the time. How did that relationship begin, and what did that do for you to kind of further things on a more national scale?
Yeah, I signed with them pretty early, actually. I did this sort of DIY touring for a good, I want to say, 2 years, and I think got a little bit of traction going just with how active I was in the DIY touring circuit. People, I think like a few people kind of were starting to know, or at least like recognize that I was, on the touring circuit. And then I was doing at the time, I had just recorded this EP with my friend Joey Lemon. He let me record an EP for very cheap in his basement, and that became my first release. It was called the Confiscation EP, and I was doing the thing that they tell you not to do, which is like send actual physical copies of your record just
right.
blindly unsolicited to record labels. I was literally putting them in envelopes and writing a letter to why I thought that I would be like a good fit to the record label and like what I had done up until that point by myself, and sending them off to labels. You know, I was like sending them to, I think I probably sent one to Sub Pop, and I probably sent one to Merge, and I probably sent one to, maybe None Such or something at the time. And I sent one to Ramsar Records because I had just recently kind of discovered the Avett Brothers, and they had that record called The Gleam that was out that I was into at the moment. And I was like, I think I just do this one too. And the way that that record got into the hands of Dolph, who owns Ramsar Records, is kind of a fun story, because he wouldn't normally be somebody that opens those sorts of packages. They end up in a bin, you know,
mm-hmm.
and stack up. And I guess one day he was walking by his young son's bedroom, who was, I think, 4 or 5 years old at the time. And he was playing something on his stereo, and Dolph peeked his head in the room and was like, "What are you listening to?" And he explained that he had just started opening some of the stuff in the bin that he keeps, you know, all of the mail in, and he liked the cover of this one because it was at the time this like hand-drawn cover that I had done, and started listening to it. And that's how Dolph heard my music, was from his 4-year-old son having put it on his stereo in his bedroom. And he wrote me an email, told me that story, and said that he wanted to release that EP, and I signed with him, and then released that EP. And he was also my manager for quite a few years as well. And yeah, we started getting some good sort of support slots from that for the Avett Brothers and Langhorne Slim. And that was sort of a really good, I think, shooting off point for me in terms of like getting up to the next level of things, I guess.
It had to feel great to be able to push that whole burden, almost the entire business and booking burden, off to somebody else after having done that for 4 or 5 years. I mean, that's a lot of work to do that stuff.
It is. And I mean, like, Ramsar is still a pretty DIY operation in itself. So there is still like quite a bit of work that I do on my own side of things. But it did just feel good to have like help, you know, and somebody that could actually speak for you, that had some sort of, I guess, weight to what they were saying. You know, if I tell someone, hey, you should listen to my record, they're like, well, who are you? Like, like, I don't know who you are. But, you know, if Dolph says it, then, you know, more people would listen to him, I guess, because,
yeah.
You know, he runs a label.
Well, yeah, and I guess there's something to it of not only other people feel that way, but I know for me it's always felt good when people are on that side of things and they believe in what I'm doing. It's like, well, yeah, I've thought that too, and I've run into a lot of roadblocks, but it's nice to hear that someone besides me thinks it's okay. It makes me feel like a little bit less crazy.
Of course, yeah, because I mean, you can't just have that unshakable confidence in yourself and your art the entire time. It's going to falter at some point, and you're going to need someone to kind of be there to be your confidence for you until you get it back.
I know. Well, talk to me then about that. Like, say you kind of sign with them, let's say the 2008 to 2015 range, because last time I saw you was like 2015 to 2016, and you were explaining to me, you're like, dude, I have just toured for the last 5 years, 7 years straight. I'm burned. Talk to me about that era of touring and what that part of your life looked like, and the good parts about it, the high points, and also the parts that were challenging.
Yeah, so at that time, not long after I had signed with Ramsar, I sort of put together this band called the Midnight Shivers. Samantha Crain and the Midnight Shivers is what we were called. And it was a pretty, like, solid, like, just rock band. We were playing, like, our arrangements were pretty close to that of the sort of emerging Americana scene at the time. Because that's what I thought was cool, I guess, at the time. That just seemed like a cool scene to be a part of. And I think I don't think I was quite in love with songwriting and music yet at that point. I was doing it more as trying to find where I fit in the world, I think. It wasn't necessarily like I was so in love with the work that I put that first. I really didn't. I was like partying my ass off. Like I think the only real line that I had to draw was from like that. I don't know if you've seen that documentary Dig, which is like
I've heard it's great though.
Yeah, the Dandy Warhols and Brian Jonestown Massacre. Like I had watched that, and so to me, I was just like, oh, that's how bands are. That's how bands act. That's the life I'm gonna live. Like, because that's got to be my people, sort of thing. And it was just like chaotic and drama filled and booze driven and drug ladled. So, and I mean, the guys that were in my band were kind of like on board with that too. So we just kind of like fell into that. Like we also thought it was really funny to just, like in interviews, just lie and give like completely wrong information because we had, watched Bob Dylan do so many like smart alecky interviews, and we were just like, yeah, I don't know, just like immature stuff. But like it was fun. Like we were just touring all the time in a van. Actually, back then it was a truck, which is crazy to think. It was like a Ford 250 extended cab with a cover over the truck bed. And so we would put our gear in the truck bed, and then we would all cram into the cab of the truck. But yeah, it was just like partying really. And then that kind of blew up. I mean, because that's like not a sustainable sort of thing. And so when we all got to the point where we hated each other and didn't want to be around each other anymore, that blew up. And then I kind of had a moment of reflection and kind of recalibrating. And I think that's when I really started appreciating songwriting and wanting to get better at it. I think up until that point, I was just like, I wrote the songs that's going to like get me into the world that I want to be in.
Gotcha.
And then at that point, that was when I started really trying to focus, I think, on the craft of songwriting. And it was only because that's where I was at that point, I guess.
In fairness,
we were still touring a lot. Yeah.
I was about to say, before you move on to that point, like in fairness, touring a club circuit, it really is easy to fall into the booze game for sure. It's just you arrive at a club, it's available for you for free. You're encouraged to do it. You get looked at sideways if you don't do it. And, I had someone whose son was thinking about joining, going on the road. He was a lot younger, and the folks were talking to me, his parents were talking to me, and they said, well, one thing that we worry about is alcohol. And I was like, you know what? It's a pretty good worry to have, man, because working in bars every night, like it can take a bite out of you. And that's something that it definitely took a bite out of me in my late 20s, early 30s. And it's still something that haunts me like a little bit. It's a really big pitfall to want to try to step around.
Yeah, it's, I think it comes from, a lot of kids that get into being in bands and being in music, like they come from a background of scarcity, like where they're not getting any sort of excess of anything in their life. And then that's how I was anyways. So the one time that I get into a thing that seems pretty cool, and people are just like, you can have all the booze you want. And I was like, cool, better take advantage of this. Like, nobody's ever given me anything for free. So I think that's probably the mindset that I had. Anyways, but yeah, I lost a lot of, I don't want to say I lost years, but there's definitely years that I don't really remember. Years of touring that I don't remember a lot of, just because I was drinking really heavily and on a lot of amphetamines, and not being like a fun person to be around, and being like a kind of an asshole. So I've spent the last 5 or 6 years trying to, save face from that.
Well, let's get into that then. One of the things that I find really interesting about you creatively is that obviously you're a songwriter, and that's why you're on this show and you write beautiful songs, but you work a lot in different mediums as well. You've written sonnets, you've produced other people's work. Can you talk to me about how you think about creativity? Do you think of yourself as a songwriter? Do you think of yourself as a poet? Do you think of yourself as anything? Like, when you get up on a given day, what are you up to, and how do you frame your creative life?
This is like a really big theme, just in my life philosophy, I guess, which is because I've spent so much time traveling, especially like in other countries that aren't the United States. I've seen differences like in mental health qualities from different populations of different countries, and I've seen what behaviors are sort of drive that. And one thing that I feel like became really apparent to me probably 5 or 6 years ago was that people outside of sort of where I was brought up didn't place their worth on where their money came from or how much they were working, or that whole idea of I work hard, therefore I'm worth something. And that was like a huge sort of revelation for me, I think, because that was the one thing that I could always point to if people didn't like my records, or if they thought that I was wasting my life doing whatever I was doing, I could just be like, but look how hard I work. I've played 250 shows this year. I've driven all over. And what I found was like, that was not the thing that was making me happy. It was just like a thing that I was using to justify my life or my existence as an artist, I guess. And from that point on, I started really, you said something, actually, I'm going to bring out like my fangirl a little bit here, because I actually really love this podcast and I listen to it very often.
Thanks,
yeah,
Sam.
you said something, I think, on the episode with Chris Porterfield, about the work being enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that occurred to me, I think, 5 or 6 years ago, where I was just like, I need to make sure that the work is what's making me happy, and it's not my expectations that I have set up for myself, like in this sort of capitalist society of what I think, how much I should be working, or how much money I should be making, or if my money is coming from music or whatever that may be. So whenever that started occurring to me, I think it opened me up to doing other things that interested me, and not feeling like I was not a musician anymore or not a songwriter anymore. It was just like another facet of myself. And there's a lot of like shame attached to that as well, where I have to work part-time jobs sometimes, and I have to talk myself out of that idea of just because I'm working this part-time job does not mean, and that's what's helping me pay my bills right now, does not mean that I am not an artist anymore, or that like I can't give time and energy to that. And I think it also helps, like, just in general, it gives you better perspective from just like in a creative way. Like, you're getting to live multiple existences, really, if you're creating outside of music, if you're working outside of music. It gives you more of a perspective of reality, I think, than if you were just sort of completely tied up in the world of music only. I think we see that with like older musicians a lot. You hear them say something and you're like, whoa, it's like somebody's like really out of touch.
I know. Yeah. There was that generation where everyone just got really fat and happy. There was that generation, basically, like, they had made all this money from vinyl sales, and then CDs became a thing, so everyone bought the same albums over again in CDs. So there's this 20 to 30 year class of musicians that are just so out of touch with not only, you know, how other musicians have had to live before and after them, but just how, you know, everyday Americans have to live, you know? Exactly.
Yeah.
I remember just one anecdote along those lines. There was a quote by, like, it wasn't by Joe Walsh, because Joe Walsh is cool. Who was it by? It was by one of those old rocker guys, and he was teaching a class about music to the college students at USC. And he was like, yeah, I wanted them to come to one of our gigs to see the dirt and the grime, what it's like when the roadies put your stuff on the bus. It's like, yeah, fair enough.
Yes.
Fair enough. You're really showing how down with the people you are, man.
Yeah. I just kind of going back to that idea about being more of like a multidisciplinary artist. I feel like that there's these times that a lot of songwriters would consider like writer's block, or like you're in a rut and you can't write a song. And to me, what I've noticed is that's just the inactive part of songwriting. There's like the active part where you're actually writing, but then there's this inactive part where you're sort of subconsciously, things are building up like in your subconscious. You're collecting things. You don't know that you're doing it, but that's the time that like the stuff is getting soaked into your consciousness. And I feel like if I'm doing things outside of just like my own sort of Samantha Crain album writing, if I can be writing poetry, or if I can be working on some music for an art gallery, or if I can be producing a record for someone else, or if I can be making baskets, or if I can be cooking or anything, it's helping that inactive time, I think. And then I don't worry so much about hitting a time of so-called writer's block, which I don't believe in. I don't think it's a thing.
That's such a good way of putting it, because I know you do need those, what you're calling inactive times. And I know that the parts in my life where I haven't done anything else in those times, like I've had the luxury of like, okay, I've made some money off a tour. I don't have to do anything else. I can just sit here and try to write all the time or wait for the songs. Those have been the periods in my life that have been the absolute most narcissistic, horrible times of my life. So when I actually have other stuff to do during that time, it actually makes just not only for better songs, but just a better disposition in life in general.
Completely agree. Yeah.
So when you sit down to work on a given day, do you go project by project? Like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to finish this book of sonnets now. I'm going to sit down and finish the writing for the next Samantha Crain record. Or is it more, I'm going to, my workspace, wherever that may be, and I'm going to create something and it will fall into one of these different projects that I'm working on?
I'm typically very project oriented and very project driven. I've tried at different times in my life to be somebody that works on various things, or assigns something that I've come up with to a specific project and then can do the same thing the next day and assign it to a different thing. But I've just learned that I work better and am better organized and happier whenever I'm sort of doing project-based stuff. So like I just released like a new record today, and now that is done, actually like out into the world, I feel like I can move on to the next project. And that's just kind of like how I've been. I don't really know what that is. I think it's probably some sort of like mental like thing that I should unpack in therapy or something, why I can't move on from something else until I get closure on something else. But yeah, that's generally how I work. I work by project. Right now is interesting though, because I've had so much extra time because of sort of self-quarantine. I have been a little bit more accepting of trying to work on a couple of different things at the same time. So maybe that's like a breakthrough for me, and that's something that I'm going to be able to do more in the future, but I'm not really sure. It's still like new territory for me to be able to work on multiple projects at the same time.
I've noticed that you produce a fair amount of your own stuff, and you've produced for other people as well. Does production for you look like hands-on recording of stuff, or is it more like the aesthetic, choosing of songs, repertoire, and stuff like that? How much recording do you get into yourself, or is that not how your mindset works?
It's both. I would consider myself to be a pretty sufficient engineer, but it's not my favorite thing to do because I'm not very fast at it. Mm-hmm. And when I'm in a creative space, efficiency becomes really important to me, because when I have an idea, like I want to get that out as soon as possible so I can kind of keep that stream going. And so usually when I'm in the studio and I'm running like on someone's budget or my own budget, I like to have an engineer that's very good and fast, so we can just like keep things moving. But I do a lot of overdubs and things at my house myself, and I've done a little bit of engineering for other projects, like when I do more instrumental stuff for art exhibits. I do a lot of that recording just here at my house. So I can do it, but it's not my favorite thing to do, and I don't get super nerdy about the all of the technical thing. It's just like it's not like the peak of my interest. My interest is more, I think, in the painting of the picture and not in the tools of painting the picture, I guess.
Gotcha. It is nice to have the amount of acumen that you have with it, though, but if for no other reason that it gives you the vocabulary to talk to good engineers when you need them to do something for you. You know what I mean?
Exactly. That's been the main purpose why I've even taken the initiative to learn what I do know, is mainly just to like have that vocabulary. So I'm not, tossing around, spending large amounts of time trying to explain what I want this vocal mic to sound like it's, in a submarine in the Indian Ocean and somebody has squashed it, like.
Right. No, that's really helpful. It really is. And it also stops you from asking for things that are impossible sometimes,
Totally, yeah.
I remember very on being in studios, and I didn't even understand if we worked at the end of the day and I wanted a copy of the stereo mix to listen at home. They'd be like, all right, well, we have to bounce it. And I'd be like, well, just give it to me right now. And they're like, no, we have to sit here and bounce it. And I couldn't understand why they couldn't just give me the mix. And I'm sure I frustrated no shortage of engineers in Chicago at the time.
Well, now.
Well, congrats on the new record, Sam. It's great to hear from you. It's been way too long. And thanks for coming on the show. It's great to hear your voice.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
That's our show for this week. It was brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Samantha Crain's latest album is entitled A Small Death, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again, you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.